I told my children their father was dead for 6 years, and he wasn't. He was alive the entire time, living 2 hours away in a rented flat above a bookshop in Durham, working part-time, sober, as far as I know, alone, and I knew exactly where he was. My daughter was 12 when I told her. My son was 9. They cried the way children cry when the world stops making sense, when something fundamental breaks and they don't have the language to understand what's been taken from them. I held them. I whispered that it was going to be okay. I lied directly into their hair while they sobbed against my chest, and I did it because I thought I was saving them. That's what I told myself. That's the story I built and lived inside for 6 years. I was protecting them from a man who had hurt us. I was giving them stability. I was making a choice that any good mother would make. But that's not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I wanted him gone. I wanted him erased. I wanted to rewrite our family story without him in it, and I was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen, even if it meant killing him off. It started the night he left. We'd been separated for 4 months by then, not officially divorced, just apart. He was living with a friend, trying to get his life together after years of drinking that had hollowed out our marriage from the inside. I told him he couldn't come home until he proved he was serious about staying sober, until he showed me, really showed me, that he could be the man I'd married instead of the one I'd learned to fear. He was trying. I'll give him that. He'd been going to meetings, staying clean for weeks at a time, calling the kids every Sunday like clockwork. But I didn't trust it. I didn't trust him. And more than that, I didn't want to. Because here's the thing no one tells you about ending a marriage. Sometimes the relief is so overwhelming that you'll do anything to protect it. I felt lighter without him. The house felt lighter. The air felt lighter. My children's faces weren't tight with anxiety every time they heard his car in the driveway. We weren't walking on egg-glass anymore, measuring our words, keeping our voices down, trying not to set him off. And I didn't want to go back. So when he called that Tuesday night and told me he was leaving, really leaving, not just the house, but the city, the county, maybe the country, I felt something I'm still ashamed to name. Hope. He said he couldn't do it anymore, couldn't handle the shame of seeing his children every week and knowing they were afraid of him. Couldn't stand living 2 hours away in a friend's spare room, piecing together shifts at a call center, watching his old life continue without him. He said he was going to disappear for a while, start over somewhere no one knew him, somewhere he could figure out who he was supposed to be. He asked me not to tell the kids yet. He said he'd call them in a few weeks once he'd settled somewhere. Once he had a plan. I said okay, and then I hung up the phone, walked into the kitchen, and started planning his funeral. Not a real one. I wasn't completely insane, but I started imagining it, how I would tell the children, what I would say, how much easier it would be if he were just gone, permanently, not missing, not absent, dead, because dead is clean, dead is final, dead doesn't call on Sundays, dead doesn't ask for visitation, dead doesn't show up 6 months sober expecting you to let him back into your life. Dead stays gone. It took me 3 weeks to actually do it. 3 weeks of him not calling, not texting, not reaching out to the kids. 3 weeks of them asking where Daddy was and why he hadn't rung. 3 weeks of me making excuses that were getting thinner and thinner, And then one night, sitting at the kitchen table after they'd gone to bed, I made the decision. I told myself it was temporary, just until he actually got in touch again. Just to give the kids something concrete to hold on to instead of the endless uncertainty of not knowing where he was or when they'd hear from him. But I knew that was a lie, even as I thought it. I called them into the living room the next morning before school, sat them down on the sofa, held both their hands, and I told them their father had been in an accident, a car accident, late at night, on a road I'd looked up online to make sure it sounded real. I told them he died instantly. I told them he hadn't suffered. I told them I was so sorry. My daughter Emma went completely still. She didn't cry. She just stared at me with these enormous gray eyes, his eyes, and I watched something shut down inside her, something that has never fully opened again. My son Jack screamed. He called me a liar. He said it wasn't true, that Daddy wouldn't die without saying goodbye, that I was wrong and horrible and he hated me. Then he ran to his room and locked the door and didn't come out for hours. I sat on the sofa, alone, listening to him sob through the wall, and I felt my heart breaking and hardening at the same time, because I'd done it. I'd said the words, and there was no taking them back now. The first few months were the hardest, not because of the grief, though there was grief, even if it was grief for a lie, but because of the logistics, the questions, the things I hadn't thought through. Emma wanted to know where the funeral was. I told her it had already happened, just close family, very small, because that's what he would have wanted. She asked why we hadn't been invited. I said it was too far away, and I didn't want to put them through that. She stopped asking after that, but I could see the question sitting behind her eyes every time she looked at me. Jack wanted to see the grave. I told him he'd been cremated. No grave, no headstone, just ashes scattered somewhere he'd loved. Where? Jack asked. I made up a beach, described it in detail, the gray sand, the sharp wind, the way the water looked almost black in the winter. I have no idea if that beach even exists, but I painted it so clearly that even I started to believe in it. School was easier than I expected. I told Emma and Jack's teachers privately before the children arrived. I cried real tears, because by then I was grieving something, even if it wasn't David's death. The teachers were kind. They watched the children carefully for signs of trauma. They sent home resources about grief counseling and support groups. I threw them all away, because the longer I maintained the lie, the more I realized I couldn't let anyone look too closely, couldn't let anyone ask too many questions. Grief counselors ask questions, support groups ask questions, and I couldn't risk someone asking the one question I didn't have an answer for. Where's the death certificate? I'd thought about faking one. I'd even looked up how to do it online, late at night when the kids were asleep. But I couldn't go through with it. That felt like crossing a line I couldn't come back from, so I just didn't mention it, and no one asked. People are surprisingly willing to take grief at face value. No one wants to interrogate a widow. No one wants to demand proof that your husband is really dead. They just believe you. And I used that. David didn't call. That was the thing that made it possible. The thing that let me keep lying day after day, week after week. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't send letters or emails or messages through mutual friends. He just vanished. Exactly like he'd said he would. And for the first year, I told myself that meant I'd made the right choice, that he'd wanted to disappear anyway, that I'd just helped the process along, given it a finality that was better for everyone. But then, 13 months after I told the children he was dead, I found him. Not physically. I wasn't looking for him. I was on Facebook, scrolling mindlessly the way you do late at night when you can't sleep. And I saw him, tagged in a photo, at someone's birthday party in Durham, smiling, holding a pint of something that looked like Coke, surrounded by people I didn't recognize, alive. I stared at that photo for 20 minutes. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might be sick, because seeing him there, real and solid and undeniably not dead, made the lie real in a way it hadn't been before. Before it was just words, a story, something I'd told to make life easier. But now it was something else. Now it was a betrayal I could see, could touch, could measure the weight of. I should have told the children then. I should have woken them up and confessed everything and dealt with the fallout. But I didn't. I closed the laptop, I went to bed, and I decided to keep lying. Because what was the alternative? Tell them I'd lied for over a year about their father being dead? Watch them look at me the way you look at a stranger? Lose whatever trust they still had in me after everything? I couldn't do it, so I didn't. And that's when the lie stopped being something I was telling them and started being something I was. The lie changed me. I don't mean that poetically. I mean it literally, physically changed who I was. I started forgetting what was real. I'd be talking to a friend about David, about the late David, about how hard it was being a widow, about raising 2 children alone, and I'd forget, just for a second, that he wasn't actually dead. I'd forget that somewhere 2 hours north, he was living a whole life I knew nothing about. I started avoiding old friends, people who'd known David, people who might ask too many questions or mention something that didn't line up with the story I'd told. I rebuilt my entire social circle around people who'd only ever known me as a widow, people who had no reason to doubt me. I got good at it, too good. I could cry on command. I could talk about the accident like I'd been there. I could describe the last time I'd seen him, a version of the last time I'd seen him that fit the narrative, without hesitating. I became someone who could lie without flinching, and that person scared me more than anything David had ever done. Emma stopped talking about him after the 2nd year. Just stopped. She packed away every photo, every memory, every piece of him, and she moved on. Or at least she seemed to. She threw herself into school, into dance, into anything that would keep her busy enough not to think. She became hard in a way 12-year-olds shouldn't be hard. Guarded, controlled. She stopped crying. She stopped asking for help. She stopped letting me in. And I told myself that was normal. That was grief. That was her way of coping. But I knew better. I knew I'd done that to her. I taught her that the people you love can disappear without warning. That loss is random and final, and there's no point falling apart because it won't bring them back. I taught her not to trust the world, and worse, I taught her not to trust me. Jack was different. Jack didn't move on. Jack built a shrine, not literally, but close. He kept every photo of David he could find. He talked about him constantly. Daddy would have loved this. Daddy used to say that. Daddy was so good at this. He turned David into a saint, a perfect father who'd been stolen away too soon. And I let him. Because what was I supposed to say? that the man he was worshiping had been a drunk who'd screamed at me in front of them more times than I could count, that the reason he'd left in the first place was because I told him to, that he wasn't dead at all, just gone. I couldn't. So I sat there and listened to Jack rewrite history, and I hated myself a little more each time. The years blurred together after that. 3 years, 4, 5. I checked David's Facebook every few months, just to make sure he was still there, still alive, still far enough away that he'd never accidentally run into us. He seemed fine, better than fine. He looked healthy, sober. He had friends. He had a job, something at a bookshop from what I could tell from the photos. He looked like someone who'd figured his life out, and I hated him for it, because I was drowning, and he was fine. I was juggling a full-time job and 2 children who were grieving a man who wasn't dead. I was lying to everyone I knew. I was waking up at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat from dreams where Emma found out and looked at me with those cold gray eyes and said, "I will never forgive you." And he was fine. It wasn't fair, and it made me angrier than I'd ever been when we were married. The call came on a Tuesday, 6 years and 2 months after I'd told the children David was dead. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, maybe, or just bad luck, made me pick up. It was David's sister, Linda. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Not since the separation. She'd always blamed me for the divorce, said I hadn't tried hard enough, hadn't been patient enough, hadn't loved him enough. I'd cut her off, blocked her number, erased her from my life the same way I'd erased him. But somehow, she'd gotten my new number, and she was calling to tell me that David was in hospital. "Nothing serious," she said quickly, hearing my sharp intake of breath. "Just a minor procedure, routine." But he'd listed me as his emergency contact, and they'd called her when they couldn't reach me. She wanted to know if I was going to visit. I said no. I said we were separated and it wasn't my place. I said I hoped he'd be okay, but I couldn't help her. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Rachel, he told me you told the kids he was dead." My blood went cold. "What?" "He told me, last year. He said he'd been trying to respect your boundaries, trying to stay away like you'd asked. But then he ran into someone, a friend of yours from the old neighborhood, and she offered her condolences. Said she was so sorry to hear he'd passed, and he realized what you'd done." I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't think past the roaring in my ears. "He didn't want to cause trouble," Linda continued, her voice tight. "He said you'd had your reasons, that he probably deserved it after everything he put you through. But Rachel, those are his children, and they think he's dead. You can't—" I hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. He knew, he'd known for over a year, and he hadn't said anything, hadn't called, hadn't shown up demanding to see the kids. He just stayed away because he thought he deserved it. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough that my hand went numb from gripping the phone, long enough that when Emma came downstairs asking what was for dinner, I couldn't remember how to answer. That night, I made a decision. I was going to tell them. I had to. Because if David knew, it was only a matter of time before someone else found out, before the lie collapsed on its own and buried me underneath it. Better to control the narrative. Better to confess than be exposed. I planned it carefully. I wrote out what I was going to say. I rehearsed it in the mirror. I imagined every possible reaction and prepared responses for all of them. But when I sat them down 2 days later, all of that disappeared. I looked at Emma, 17 now, poised and distant and so much harder than any 17-year-old should be. I looked at Jack, 14, still building his shrine, still talking about his perfect dead father. And I couldn't do it. I told them I needed to talk to them about something important. I told them I loved them. I told them I'd made a lot of mistakes as a parent and I was sorry. And then I told them I was thinking about selling the house. Emma shrugged. Jack asked if he could keep his room the same in the new place. And that was it. I'd lost my nerve. Again. I told myself I'd do it next week, then next month, then after Jack's exams, then after Emma's 18th birthday. I was still telling myself that when David showed up at my door. It was a Saturday morning. Emma was at a friend's house. Jack was upstairs gaming. I was making coffee when the doorbell rang. I thought it was a delivery, or a neighbor, or anyone in the world except the man I'd declared dead 6 years ago. But when I opened the door, there he was, older, grayer, thinner than I remembered, but unmistakably, undeniably alive. We stared at each other for a long moment. I thought about slamming the door. I thought about screaming. I thought about pretending I didn't know him. Instead, I said, "You can't be here." "I know," he said quietly, "but we need to talk." "No, you need to leave, right now, before Jack sees you." "Rachel, I mean it, David. You can't be here. You're dead. You've been dead for 6 years. If he sees you, he's going to see me eventually," David said, and his voice was so calm, so steady, that I wanted to hit him. "That's why I'm here. I'm not trying to ruin your life, Rachel. I'm not trying to hurt the kids. But I can't keep pretending I don't exist. And you can't keep telling them I'm dead." "You left," I hissed, stepping out onto the porch and pulling the door shut behind me. "You called me and said you were leaving, and you never called again. For 6 years, you didn't call them. You didn't send cards. You disappeared. Because you asked me to. I asked you to stay away until you got sober. I didn't ask you to vanish. You told them I was dead, Rachel." The words hung between us, heavy, undeniable. "I did what I had to do," I said finally. "No, you did what was easiest. For you." "How dare you?" "I'm not judging you," he said, holding up his hands. "I'm really not. I know I put you through hell. I know I was a terrible husband and a worse father. I know you had every reason to want me gone. But those are my kids too, and they deserve to know I'm alive." I felt something crack inside me, something I'd been holding together through sheer force of will for 6 years. "They've moved on," I said, and my voice broke. "They're okay now. They're happy. If you come back, if you tell them, they're not okay," David said gently. "I've been watching, Rachel, not creeping, not stalking, just checking in. I see Emma's Instagram. I see Jack's school photos on the PTA website. They're not okay. Emma looks like she's carrying the world on her shoulders. And Jack talks about me like I was some kind of hero, like I was perfect. And that's not fair to him. That's not fair to either of them. And whose fault is that?" I shot back. "Yours," he said simply. "This one is yours." I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend myself, to explain, to make him understand why I'd done what I'd done. But standing there on my own porch, looking at the man I'd killed off 6 years ago, I realized something. He was right. This wasn't about protecting the children. It had never been about protecting the children. It was about protecting myself, about creating a narrative I could control, about erasing the parts of my life that were messy and complicated and painful, and I'd used my children to do it. "What do you want?" I asked finally. "I want to tell them the truth," David said. "Together, today, before someone else does it for us. Jack's upstairs. I know. If we do this, he's going to hate me. Probably. Emma already barely speaks to me. This will destroy whatever's left." "Maybe," David said. "Or maybe it'll finally let her breathe." I looked at him for a long time. This man I'd loved once, this man I'd feared, this man I'd erased, and I realized I didn't have a choice anymore. The lie was done. It had been done the moment he rang the doorbell. All that was left now was the truth. "Okay," I said. We went inside together. Jack was in the living room when we walked in. He looked up from his phone, glanced at David, and his face went blank with confusion. "Mom, who's—" And then he saw it. I watched it happen in real time. The recognition. The impossible, horrible recognition. "Dad?" The word came out broken, barely a whisper. David's face crumpled. "Hi, Jack." Jack stood up slowly. He looked at David, then at me, then back at David. "You're dead," he said. "You died." Mom said, "I know what she said." David replied gently. "And I'm so sorry. But I'm not dead, mate. I'm right here." Jack turned to me, and the look on his face, I'll carry that look for the rest of my life. "You lied?" I couldn't speak. I could only nod. "For 6 years? You lied for 6 years? Jack, you let me think he was dead." His voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly he was crying, huge gasping sobs that shook his whole body. "You let me think. I cried every night for months. I thought he was gone. I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" Jack looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was something dangerous. "You're sorry?" David moved toward him, hands outstretched, but Jack jerked away. "Don't touch me. Don't. You left. You both left. You left. And she lied. And I don't." He ran up the stairs into his room, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. David and I stood in the living room in silence. "I'll go talk to him," David said finally. "He won't want to see you." "I know, but I'm going anyway." He went upstairs. I heard the murmur of his voice through Jack's door. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone, patient, steady, there. I sat down on the sofa and waited for my world to end. Emma came home an hour later. She walked in through the front door, saw me sitting there, and frowned. "Mom, are you okay? Your father's upstairs." She went very still. "What?" "He's alive. He's been alive this whole time. He's upstairs talking to Jack." Emma stared at me. Her face didn't change. Not a flicker, not a tear. Just that same cold, controlled mask she'd been wearing for 6 years. "Okay," she said finally. "Emma, I need a minute." She walked past me, up the stairs and into her room. She shut the door quietly. No slam, no drama, just a soft click. And somehow that was worse than anything Jack had done. David stayed for 3 hours. He talked to Jack. He talked to Emma. He sat with them separately, then together, and let them scream and cry and ask questions he didn't have good answers for. He told them the truth. About the drinking, about leaving, about me telling him to stay away, about not knowing I'd told them he was dead until a year ago, about why he'd stayed gone even after he knew. When he finally came back downstairs, he looked exhausted. "They want me to leave," he said, "but I'm coming back tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as it takes." "Okay." They're angry, Rachel. Both of them, but especially Emma. You need to prepare for that. I know. He looked at me for a long moment. Why did you do it? I could have lied. I could have given him the same reasons I'd been giving myself for 6 years. Protection, stability, love. But I was done lying. Because I wanted you gone, I said. Because it was easier than dealing with the mess of having you in our lives. Because I thought I could create the family I wanted if I just erased the parts I didn't. David nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He left. I sat alone in my living room as the sun set, waiting for my children to come downstairs. They didn't. The first week was hell. Jack wouldn't speak to me, wouldn't look at me, wouldn't eat meals at the same table. He'd come down when I was in another room, make himself something to eat, and disappear back upstairs. Emma was worse, because Emma did look at me with those cold gray eyes, and every time she did, I saw exactly what she thought of me. David came every day. He'd sit with them, take them out for coffee, let them ask questions. He never made excuses for me, never tried to soften what I'd done. He just listened. And slowly, over weeks and then months, I watched my children start to trust him again. They didn't trust me. Emma moved out 3 months after David came back. She'd been planning to anyway. University was starting in September, but she moved early, found a flat share, told me she'd come back for visits but needed space. She hasn't been back yet. That was 8 months ago. Jack stays because he's only 15 and doesn't have a choice. But he's not here, not really. He's polite when he has to be, silent the rest of the time. He counts down the days until he can leave too. David and I are civil. We have to be for Jack's sake. We have careful, stilted conversations about schedules and school and money. We don't talk about what I did. We don't talk about why. There's nothing left to say. I thought the truth would set me free. That's what people always say, isn't it? The truth will set you free. But it didn't. The truth destroyed everything. My relationship with my children, the family I'd tried so hard to protect, the version of myself I'd spent 6 years building. All of it. Gone. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake at night, is that I did it to myself. Not the affair, not David's drinking, not the separation or the hard years that came before. Me, my choice, my lie. I told myself I was protecting them, but I was protecting myself from discomfort, from complexity, from having to share my children with a man I didn't want in my life anymore. I erased him, and in doing so, I erased the parts of my children that came from him, the parts that needed him, the parts that deserved the truth, even if the truth was messy. I tried to control their grief, their story, their understanding of their own family. And now I've lost them. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just told the truth from the beginning. If I'd said, your father is struggling and he's going away for a while, and I don't know when he's coming back. It would have been hard. They would have been hurt. They would have had questions I couldn't answer. But they would have had the truth. And maybe, just maybe, they would have had me too. I'm going to therapy now. Court mandated, actually. Part of the custody agreement David and I are working through. The therapist asks me a lot of questions about control, about fear, about what it costs to live inside a lie for that long. I don't have good answers yet, but I'm trying. I'm trying to understand the woman who stood in her kitchen 6 years ago and decided to kill off her children's father because it was easier than letting them miss him. I'm trying to forgive her. I don't know if I can. Emma called last week, first time in 3 months. She didn't say much, just asked how I was, told me about her classes, hung up after 5 minutes, but she called. Jack still won't speak to me unless he has to. But yesterday I saw him looking at an old photo album, one with pictures of all of us, me, him, Emma, David, back when we were still a family. He didn't know I was watching, and when he saw me, he closed it quickly and left the room. But for just a second, I saw something on his face that wasn't anger. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if my children will ever forgive me. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. What I do know is this: the lie didn't keep my family together. It tore us apart. And I'm the one who did it.